This is a documentary directed by John Hoffman and Janet Tobias. It says on the press notes, Dr. Fauci had no creative control over the film. He was not paid for his participation, nor does he have any financial interest in the film's release. The film follows his extraordinary life, from his early life, his work in immunology and infectious diseases, through his central role in dealing with the emerging AIDS pandemic, which is very interesting because I didn't know about this. But firstly, there's horrible reminders of the prejudice against people with AIDS, when AIDS first appeared. I mean, absolutely horrendous stuff. People who call themselves Christians just being the most un-Christian people imaginable. But Dr. Fauci became the target of ACT UP protests for not acting fast enough to get a treatment out there. And he quotes The Godfather about this thing about it's not personal, it's business a couple of times in the documentary. And one of the things that we learned is that rather than running away from the ACT UP protests, he engaged with them. He said, "Okay, well, tell me what it is that I'm doing wrong. Tell me what it is that you need." And we hear from people who are ACT UP protesters. We see some of them, at one point basically accusing him of the most terrible negligence and being responsible for death, to embracing the fact that he was willing to go out and say, "Okay, tell me how we can do this better." And you then see the two sides coming together, of the ACT UP protesters and the scientific community coming together to make the treatment better and to understand better how to deal with it. We see his leadership during the Ebola outbreak thing, but when he hugged the patient who had recovered, in a way to let people know that this was not to be feared, that it was possible to overcome this. And then we get into COVID. And one of the things that the interview says is, he's asked at one point, how much do you want to talk about Trump? And he says, "Yikes." And I think yikes is exactly the word. We see him on stage with Trump just spouting nonsense, and Dr. Fauci being the person who has to step up and say, there is no clinical evidence that hydroxychloroquine, or whatever you call it, has any, because there isn't any information. Trump is saying, well, I think it'll work. And he's saying, no, there isn't any evidence. We have Trump calling it the China plague, which harks back to the God's plague stuff that was thrown around during the AIDS epidemic. We have Tucker Carlson, being idiotic about Fauci. We have Trump saying, slow the testing down. We have the death threats against Dr. Fauci. We have the fact that at one point he opened an envelope and powder exploded all over him, and he didn't know whether it was flour or ricin. We have the hatred from the dark web wackos and the MAGA morons. And yet through all of this, he keeps a level head. And I think what the documentary suggests is that his experience of dealing with the AIDS epidemic, in which he learnt that what he should do was to reach out to the ACT UP activists and say, look, how can we work this better together? And there is a very depressing moment in the documentary in which he says the greatness of what happened then was that the two sides came together, they found common ground, and they moved forward. And he says, and I struggle to see that happening between the two sides of the debate in what's happened now with COVID. I think the documentary is very, very interesting. I thought that Dr. Fauci came out of it as a really honest and very, very fascinating character. And I was appalled, genuinely appalled, by the idiocy and the hatred of the people who, made threats against him and his family, when he is clearly somebody who knows what he's talking about, genuinely trying to do the best for everybody.